discussing today, we always try to find the cultural catalyst of our day. Those are the men and women that God has raised up to be the discerners of information in the gates of a free society. We try to bring to you people from all different walks of life. We try to bring them from the religious world, the education world, the technical world, the medical world. Today, we're gonna kind of dip our toe into the business world, that also / in the ministry world. Our guest today is Rich Stearns. Rich is the president emeritus of World Vision US. He's the former corporate CEO at Parker Brothers and Lenox China. He has now got a brand new book out that I can't wait to kind of discuss it with him. Lead Like It Matters to God. I will tell you, if it's anything that does the success of the books like Unfinished and The Hole in Our Gospel, this is going to be an incredible journey for him and his family. His wife, Renee, they've got 5 children, 6 grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome into this studio, Mr. Rich Stearns. Welcome, Rich. We're glad you're here.
Hey, it's great to hear all that applause.
In a world of COVID, we just like to hear any kind of applause, any kind of, well, even virtual. And we do that in case anyone doesn't like what I say. I can just hit the applause button. If they don't laugh at my jokes, I got a laugh button. Anything we need to make this podcast go.
I think every pastor ought to have a button like that in the sanctuary.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, we hear too many of the boos. Anyway, one of the things in your resume that we were looking at is you made a decisive move from the corporate world to back into the Christian ministry. And this happened really before things became normal, like Buford's Halftime and things like that. You were the CEO of Parker Brothers, and then you moved to Lenox China, but you quit your job and to take over the helm of the largest ministry in the world, World Vision. I got to ask, what was your motivation behind that?
Well, it's a pretty amazing story, Scott. I mean, I was, as you say, I was at the peak of my career, my business career at Lenox. I was CEO there. I was 47 years old. I was just getting to a place where I'd make some serious money. And I had 5 kids, that I had to worry about college and all, and braces and all of that stuff that kids need these days. And I was, as I like to say, I was minding my own business, and one day the phone rang, and it was an executive recruiter, a Christian recruiter, who said they were looking for a new CEO for World Vision, and I said, well, why are you calling me? I said, I've never been to Africa. I don't know anything about global poverty. I've never done any fundraising, and I'm not available, and I'm not interested. But other than that, I mean, I'm a perfect candidate, right? So we talked for a while, and he just kept coming back at me about, gee, I think you're underselling your qualifications. I think you could be a good candidate for this job. And I said to him, Rob, I said, look, I'll pray about this, and I'll think of people that I know that maybe would be a good candidate for this. But I said, the way I look at it, you're looking for someone that's part CEO, part Mother Teresa, and part Indiana Jones. I mean, this person's going to have to fly all over the world and go to Iraq and South Sudan and places like that. And I said, good luck with this search, because I don't know anybody that has those 3 characteristics. And so I was trying to get off the phone, because I was starting to sense in my spirit that this was a dangerous phone call for me. And then he said something, Scott. He said, let me ask you a different question. And I was like, good, ask me a different question. And he said, are you willing, Rich, to be open to God's will for your life? And, on the surface, if you're a Christian, you say, of course, I want to be open to God's will for my life. That's what I do. That's what Christians are all about. And, but, in this particular case, as I started to think about that question, I realized that behind that question were these other questions. Rich, are you willing to quit your career and your job? And are you willing to sell the house of your dreams? We bought a 200-year-old farmhouse on 5 acres, and we're raising our kids there. It was like heaven for our kids. And are you willing to sell that house and pack up and leave all your friends and family and move to Seattle, Washington, where the sun never shines and the Mariners never win? And are you willing to take the big pay cut that you're going to have to take? But even beyond all that, there was the question of, Rich, are you willing to go into the heartbreak of the world? Are you willing to go to refugee camps and famine zones and see the faces of hungry children and just see human suffering? And are you willing to follow me there, Rich? Those were kind of the questions that percolated through my mind that day. But as I say in my first book, Scott, The Hole in Our Gospel, I was a reluctant recruit. And in the end, I said yes, really out of a sense of obedience. Lord, if this is what you're calling to me, I guess I do have a choice, but I can't turn away, and so I'll say yes, but I'm terrified. I'm worried that this is a terrible mistake for World Vision and for me. And so I was no superhero. I wasn't, this spiritual superhero that said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." I kind of like Moses. I went kicking and screaming. Moses went kicking and screaming to confront the Pharaoh after God called him. And I was more like Moses.
Yeah.
But anyways, I did go to World Vision, and it was the greatest adventure of my life. For 20 years, I served as president. I traveled the world. I flew 3 million miles. I met incredible people.
How long was that, remembering back, how long was that struggle before your yes was on the table of going, okay, I'll go? Are we talking, was it a week? Was it a month? Was it a year that from that first phone call to where you had peace in your spirit?
Well, that phone call came in January of that year. And I think it was April that I formally accepted the board's offer. I had to be interviewed. There were lots of other candidates, and I actually threw my hat in the ring thinking, well, no Christian board of directors in their right mind would choose me for this job. So I'm actually probably pretty safe if I throw my hat in the ring and say, all right, Lord, I'm available, but I know you're not going to pick me, but I'm available. And I was literally shocked when in March, I got the call after the interview process that the board had chosen me. And I just felt a real heaviness in my spirit, like, oh no, really? The board, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
And in April, I formally accepted. And then in June, I resigned from Lennox. I had to finish my year at Lennox, my fiscal year. And then I started at World Vision. I left Lennox on a Friday and I started Monday at World Vision. And then 60 days later, I was in the middle of Uganda, with a camera crew, coming with me. And so I would say I didn't really feel peace in my spirit until about 6 months after I had said yes, because those first 6 months on the job were very stressful. And of course, we were moving our family across the country and packing up all of our belongings and trying to resettle the kids in new schools. And so, but probably about 6 months in, I started to feel the Lord's favor, if you will, and the affirmation that you're in the right place, Rich. You've been obedient and you're right where I want you to be. And I started to feel that in my spirit.
Yeah, I mean, when you make that transition, there is so much more than just your yes. You've already discussed it. I mean, you're going from a corporate, not secular, because that means without God. You are a follower of Christ in that world, but you were going into from a marketplace into a ministry platform. I'm not sure. I'd never read on your bio that you'd gone to seminary, so I'm not sure if you're seminary trained. So you're going from a corporate America to ministry America, dealing with churches, dealing with organizations without any seminary training. That's got to be intimidating in so many different levels. Just think about if pastors started working in the corporate field and not knowing how to operate in that world, there is a time of transition. So you had to have learned a lot in the corporate area that you're able to bring over. So instead of talking about what you didn't know, I think it's best to focus on what you did know, because it was quite, remarkable, because it built the platform. What were some of those lessons that you learned that were able to transcend over into the ministry world?
Yeah, so good question. The first thing I noticed is what was familiar, so, Lennox had a a marketing department. World Vision had a marketing department. Lennox had a sales department. World Vision had a series of fundraisers around the country that raised money. Lennox had a financial organization, CFO, so did World Vision. Human resources, same as World Vision. So I use the metaphor that if you're a pilot and you've flown 737s for your whole life, and somebody put you in the cockpit of a 747, a lot of the principles and controls are all the same. They're business principles. If you're a pilot, you know how to fly. You know about the altimeter and how to fly a plane. And but there's some new things you have to learn. There's probably some nuances in the 747 that are different from a 737. And so I think the biggest nuance at World Vision for me was the realization, probably within a month after I got there, that the staff at World Vision, they wanted a spiritual leader, not just a business leader. They wanted someone who could speak from Scripture about the ministry and be inspirational and pastoral with them. It wasn't good enough that I really knew my marketing and finance and those kinds of things. And so that was something I had to grow into. I had to grow into that pastoral side. As you said, I had no seminary training. I've been a Christian since I became a Christian in business school, actually, and I'd been very involved with my churches along the way, but I had no formal theological training. And then, ironically, years later, I've now written 3 or 4 books that are very theological in their underpinnings. And so I've done a lot of self-study on that stuff and learned along the way. But I think the principle here is that, once I surrendered to God and said, not my will, but thy will, Lord. And I talk about this in my book. The very first chapter on values is the importance of surrender, that Christians need to first surrender. And once you surrender to the Lord, you're actually surrendering, in some ways, the outcome to him. Like all God calls us to do is to be faithful and obedient. And if we're faithful and obedient, we can trust him for the outcome, right? We can trust him for the outcome. So I didn't have to carry the weight of the world, all those hungry children in the world. I didn't have to carry that all on my shoulders, because I surrendered to the Lord and I said, not my will, but thy will. And Lord, you love the children more than I do. So just help me, guide me, lead me, do your thing, Lord. And I'm here. I'm available to be used.
So tell me this, in 20 years, looking back on it, what were some of let's talk about some of the successes and some of the challenges as a leader in the world's largest Christian service organization. I mean, let's discuss the victories first. What are some of the most successful things you saw?
Well, you realize pretty early on in the job is that instead of making dishes and selling them to consumers, which I did at Lennox, pretty straightforward, you're trying to tackle the oldest problems facing the human race: poverty, violence, human trafficking, famine, pandemic diseases, economic deprivation. Even genocide, in some of the places in which World Vision works, refugees migrating. And so, to tackle those problems, it's like, you better have a big God, because, those are problems that are, so difficult from a human vantage point to solve. But there were victories. Tremendous victories. So we took on the AIDS pandemic early in my tenure at World Vision, I think around 2001. AIDS was ravaging Africa, leaving 13 million orphans behind and almost as many widows. And it was just a devastating situation that most Americans were not even familiar with. And so we mounted a campaign. I talk about this in my book in the chapter on courage. And we mounted a campaign to raise awareness for AIDS and to recruit Christians and churches to respond with love and generosity, so that we could help those widows and orphans that were left behind. And we could also put in some prevention programs to help people avoid getting infected with HIV. A lot of education. We worked with African pastors and even with the U.S. government, with government grants to do that. that campaign was very successful. It went on for about 5 years, and we made a huge impact on HIV and AIDS, and especially on the victims of HIV and AIDS, the widows and orphans in particular.
Mm.
One other I'd mention is clean water. I mean, can you imagine? I've met 70-year-old men and women who have never taken a hot shower in their lives or a hot bath. All they've ever had is go down to the river or the stream and wade in and try to wash yourself. They don't have running water in their home. They don't have a cup of clean water to drink. They're constantly sick because of parasites in the water. So the lack of clean water was a massive problem, and still is a massive problem. I think there's something like 600 million people in the world that don't have access to clean water within a 30-minute walk of their home, if you can imagine that. So around 2009, I launched an initiative that we were going to start doing clean water on a much bigger scale. And at the time, we were bringing clean water to about 200,000 people a year. And that sounds like a lot, right? 200,000 people a year. Today, more than 10 years later, we're about 3.5 million people a year are getting clean water through World Vision.
Wow.
And we're the number one provider of clean water in the world. And I think 3 schools a day in Africa are getting clean water at the school. So the students have water to wash, to drink, at school. And, but that was a huge project. It required, to kick it off, we needed $250 million of capital we had to raise to buy the drilling rigs and to hire the hydrogeologists and the teams. And we succeeded. We did it. And then we kicked off another campaign to raise almost $500 million in the next 5 to 7 years to continue the work. So,
wow,
those are 2 of the big victories, I would say, that we had.
Those are stellar. Those are stellar victories. I'll take that. What some of the challenges? What's some of the things of navigating a Christian service organization worldwide? And from Seattle, Washington, there had to be some challenges.
Well, you've said how big World Vision is. World Vision was founded in 1950 by an evangelist, actually, Bob Pierce. Interesting background. Reminds me of your background. And he just had a heart for the poor. I mean, he had a heart for the gospel, but when he was preaching the gospel over in Korea and China at the time in the 1940s, late 40s, he just saw the poverty and the hunger and during the Korean War, the terrible disruption and the many orphans and street children. And so he had the heart of an evangelist, but he came back and said, we've got to do something to help these kids. We've got to, we can't just preach the gospel to their hungry bellies. We've got to do something. He started orphanages and he started feeding programs. And well, anyways, 70 years later, World Vision is a $3 billion organization in 100 countries with more than 40,000 full-time employees. And we estimate we help and touch the lives of more than 100 million people every year through our work. So it's a huge operation. And as you can imagine, just the challenge of running an organization in 100 countries. And I didn't do it alone. I was the CEO of World Vision US, but World Vision Canada had a president, World Vision Kenya had a president, and it was all part of this big federation that's World Vision International. But there are always challenges working cross-culturally, finding qualified people in a country like Chad, where, it's such a poor country. And so personnel has always been a challenge, to find qualified people and leaders to step up and lead those things. And just the challenges of facing, violence, working in war zones. When I was in South Sudan a few years ago with a team, we're surrounded by guys in camouflage with AK-47s. And, I didn't know if that was my last day or, what was going to happen, but we managed to talk our way out of it. And, but you're trying to help the poor in the middle of these war zones, the Syrian war and, the violence in South Sudan. And, so, it's just really challenging work to get done.
Yeah.
And
there ought to be, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing, come stateside, the biggest challenge in the United States is getting people to care, right? Because we run off donations at World Vision. So if the American public is apathetic and don't really care enough about helping people in another country that they'll probably never meet, then we can't do anything, because without donations coming in from generous people, 90+% of our donors are Christian. We can't get the work done. So it's a constant challenge to kind of confront Christians with both the need and the opportunity and the biblical imperative to care for the least of these. And when we do that well, people respond and people give, because Christians are basically generous people. They just need to understand what's happening, and once they understand, I think they do give.
Sure. I would not want to be in a world without the church, because we are the ones we get bruised up a lot. We get beaten up a lot, but we are the ones that are first in, with guys like World Vision, other Christian service organizations out there. And so that leads me, we're now to the point where a couple of years ago, you retired from World Vision. You're president emeritus, but you've got some time on your hands now, and you've written this new book called Lead Like It Matters to God. And throughout the book, you kind of, you mentioned, you call something values-based leadership. Now, I got to ask you, what makes this book different than all the other leadership books out there written by our Christian leaders?
Well, in a nutshell, if you look at most leadership books, are books intended with a goal of making you more successful as a leader. This is a book about making you more faithful as a leader. And my premise here, Scott, is that God is much more concerned about our character than he is about our accomplishments. So God prefers a leader of character, genuine Christian character, a person of integrity, a person of humility, a person that has courage and perseverance and is faithful to the teachings of Scripture and the values of Scripture, a leader who treats their people with kindness and generosity and care. He's much more impressed by that kind of leader than he is a leader who is successful by all the metrics, maybe leading a mega church, with 20,000 people attending it, but doesn't have the underlying character of Christ in his or her life, and is not treating the people around them with that kind of care and concern for the employees, the members of your organization, and those kinds of things. So, we just have to look around. One of the reasons I wrote this book is I think we're in a values crisis in America. So you look at the Me Too movement and how much sexual harassment has come out since the Me Too movement was launched, the revelations, and not just in the secular world, in the church as well, and the child abuse scandals. And then you look at corporate scandals, the opioid pandemic, where greedy executives, I was a corporate executive, but when you put profit ahead of people and your products are killing your own customers because of the addictions that you're driving, that's a crisis of values. We've seen it in our politics, a crisis of values, integrity, truth, honesty, goodwill and willingness to work with each other across the aisle and compromise. That's all gone. It seems to be all gone. And then you look at the church and you see some prominent failures of Christian leaders, which is always tragic. And you ask the question, what's happened to our values? What happened to integrity? And what happened to sacrifice and humility and perseverance and excellence and honor and, these values that we were taught when we were kids? And so this book is about values-driven leadership, that when you stand before God someday, he's not going to be impressed with how many people go to your church. He's not going to be impressed with the title on your business card or the positions you've held. He's going to do a deep x-ray of your character and say, what kind of ambassador were you for my son, Jesus Christ? What kind of ambassador were you to the world? And I bet there's going to be some pastors of little tiny churches of 50 people who are going to be at the head of the line, getting praise from the Lord for their faithfulness. And there's going to be some big ministry leaders that are at the back of the line, who won't get the same kind of praise because, they didn't lead with that kind of character.
Well, I always get sometimes the criticism that I'm a professional Christian. I'm a paid vocational minister. So when I'm speaking to businessmen, businesswomen, about how to live their lives in the marketplace when I'm over here in the ministry, it may seem null and void to them. But you're someone that's kind of balanced both. You have been in the ministry. You came out of the marketplace. So if someone's, let's say, a small business owner, maybe maybe a hospital administrator, someone who owns a construction company, someone in the marketplace, how do your principles, what are the benefits of reading this book? How can they apply it to where they're living today?
Yeah, no, good question. And, first of all, I think uh, the first principle to understand is, as a Christian, the Lord asks us to surrender our ambitions for his ambitions for us, right? So most people have ambitions, they want to become this or that, they want to do this or that. But the first step for Christian leaders is to surrender to the Lord and say, Lord, not my will, but thy will. I'm going to put my ambitions down at your feet, and I'm going to replace them with your ambitions for me. And then the question is, how can I serve you in my life, in my career, in my work, in my community? And that's my number one job. So I talk in the book about your number one job, wherever you work. I don't care if you run a restaurant, work in a grocery store, you're the CEO of Google. If you're a Christian, your one job is to be an ambassador for Christ. And as you'll see in the book, 2 Corinthians 5:20 is kind of a verse that goes through the book, and it goes like this. Paul says, we are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God is making his appeal through us. So if you're working in a Burger King, God is making his appeal to people through you, through your conduct, through your character, through your witness. And so once you get that right, as a business person in the marketplace, and you realize that, look, hey, I'm a small business owner and I run a restaurant, but my purpose here is to be an ambassador for Christ, using my family business and my restaurant as a platform, the platform that God has blessed me with. And if you're a corporate CEO, same thing. How can I serve the people that God has placed under my leadership, in my care? How can I help them develop their gifts and talents, their God-given abilities? How can I be an ambassador for Christ in this workplace? So that's the framework that I think you have to start with. And then your character is comprised of these values. And I write about 17 leadership values or qualities that are important to the Christian leader. And those values, qualities comprise your character. That's what your character is made all about. Now, I talk a lot in the book about how success can become an idol. Scripture says a lot about money and a lot about be careful about wealth or the love of money, the love of success, the adulation of others. And so we have to be careful that success is not our idol. And it starts to replace our God-given purpose where we work. But I believe that leaders who lead with these values are much more likely to be successful, because these are biblical principles about how to live and how to work and how to treat other people. And so if you live by those, you may not be successful in earthly terms, but you're probably much more likely to have success in your business if you lead like this.
Well, there's 17 of them that you walk through in your book. And we're not going to go through all 17, or they wouldn't buy the book. And we want you all to go out and buy the book, Lead Like It Matters to God. But let me ask you this. Of those 17, which one comes? I'm gonna give you it's an easy question, but it's probably a hard question. Which one of those 17 comes easiest for you to live out?
Oh, wow.
Because most people would ask you which one's the hardest, and I go, focus on your strengths. Which one of those 17 that you just kind of go, yep, I still have a long way to go, but this one is the one that I've kind of hit the standard on.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of them that I still struggle to live out. I don't think it's easy to live out these values. And every day you have to kind of recommit to saying, how do I make sure that I remain humble, that I work with excellence, how do I face tough problems with courage and those kinds of things. There's actually a good cop-out answer for me here. One of the qualities I write about, which might surprise a lot of listeners, is humor. That humor can be a very powerful tool for a leader to use, because humor puts people at ease.
Hmm.
Humor reduces tension. When you're facing a really difficult problem and situation, a little humor can break the ice, and it helps people not take themselves so seriously. And I love humor. I mean, I love to laugh. I love to laugh with my coworkers. And, I always try to, lighten things up. You can imagine at World Vision, when every day you're facing human tragedy and suffering and how grim it can be. And one of my worries when I came to World Vision is I said, oh, I will die there if these are all people with long faces who never smile, who never laugh, who are always depressed about human suffering. I will die on a vine there. And when I got there, what I realized is that those people, almost more than anybody, need to lighten it up. They need to
Yeah.
be able to laugh. They need to be able to, it's almost therapy, right? When you're facing these
Mm.
difficult situations, and you care about them so much, laughter is a relief.
It's good medicine, according to
It's good.
scripture.
It's good medicine. And I say that in the book. So humor is the one that's probably the easiest for me because I just have a natural sense of humor and like to do that. But I would say all of these, we have to work on.
Yeah.
Humility is one. Humility is one every leader has to work on, because the minute you get a big title and people start looking to you as some special person on a pedestal who's got all the answers, that power can go to your head. That adulation can go to your head, and you really have to work to keep yourself humble.
Absolutely. In fact, that's the reason I'll never write the book. I'm humble and proud of it. But anyway, uh, so, all right, I want to turn this. We've talked about the easiest one. I'll just be vulnerable about coming out of 2020. One of those 17 is courage. And so a lot of people faced, we always say if we hear the term unprecedented ever again, we're going to kick someone in the shins because we're tired of hearing the term unprecedented. But a lot of economic hardship was brought to a lot of businesses, both small and large. Um, how does your book reach out to those who are struggling in times like these?
Well, I think in times like these, and I won't use the word unprecedented, in times like these, we really need to fall back on our values. In fact, one of the things I say in the book is that a leader's values or character are not forged in crisis. Your character is not created in crisis, it's revealed in crisis. So a crisis reveals some of our weaknesses and our anxieties, and all of those things are revealed in crises. And so this year, I think we've seen leaders, I'm not going to name names, but there are leaders that led well through COVID and put people first and really tried to care about the people that were affected in their organizations, whatever those organizations might have been. And then there are those that looked out for number one and looked out for profits and looked out for, they weren't, their character was revealed by the crisis. And so I think those are things that are often revealed. But I think some of the most important values in times like these is, number one would be perseverance. How do you slog through yet another day of 8 hours of Zoom meetings? How do you motivate yourself to get out of bed in the morning and face the challenges without the camaraderie of people around you in a bustling office and whatever your workplace might have been before? And so perseverance, and and it's important for a leader because the people you lead are struggling as well. They've got kids they're trying to homeschool while they're on Zoom calls, and they've had economic hardships probably during COVID. Maybe one of the wife or the husband's gotten laid off or something, and so they need a leader who's going to help them to persevere through these things. And then the other quality that I think is so important is encouragement. And I talk about encouragement as a powerful tool for leaders, that when you encourage people, you affirm them, you tell them the things they're doing well, and you just praise people when you can, when they're doing something well or they're working hard, give them an attaboy, attagirl. And that goes a long way toward helping people get through tough times. But if you're a leader that's always being critical and, you didn't do this and you didn't do that, and, it's already Thursday and I thought this was going to be done by Tuesday. And, on top of all the other anxieties and stresses right now, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. But, and part of encouragement is, instead of a Zoom call with 20 people on it, call them one-on-one and say, hey, how you doing? How's your family doing? What can I do to help? Is there anything I can do, in the workplace? Schedule calls at a different hour so I'm not interfering with your kid's school. Just things like that people appreciate and say, hey, the boss cares. The boss cares about what's happening in my life.
So I've got to ask, you've got this new book, Lead Like It Matters to God. You're president emeritus of World Vision US. Do you still spend a lot of time in Seattle? Or are you in other parts of the country where there's sunshine? Or are you staying up in the Northwest?
Well, we retired here in the Northwest. We lived in Seattle longer than we'd lived anywhere else. We've been here 23 years now. And so our friends, our church, we're here and it's familiar. So we stayed here. And, just so people know, as president emeritus, I'm not an employee anymore. It's just an honorary title, but they occasionally call me, like I did devotions this week for their senior team meeting on Zoom. And I did devotions for World Vision Canada a couple of weeks ago. And occasionally I have a speaking engagement. I used to do a little traveling to speak at a church or to speak at a donor gathering. When COVID hit, that shut down. It'll probably open up again later in the year. But mostly I'm retired. And so in my retirement, I thought, well, I've had leadership roles for more than half my life. And I think I've learned a thing or two about leadership that might benefit younger Christian leaders. So I thought, well, I'll write this book. I'll get out of my wife's hair. She's not used to having me home 24 hours a day. So I go to my basement office and I wrote the book. And again, my hope and prayer is that younger leaders will read it and maybe learn some things I wish I'd known in my 20s or 30s.
When COVID hit, we all went home for 24 hours a day, and our wives and our husbands were all going, get out of here. I will say, the baton's been passed to Edgar Sandoval, and Edgar is just one of those guys I believe exemplifies all 17 of those characteristics that you bring out in your book. I was very impressed with him. Love he does have such a humble spirit about him. And I think you've left that in incredible hands at World Vision US. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Man, I just hope this Lead Like It Matters to God just even goes past how many people read The Hole in Our Gospel and Unfinished, the books you've written before. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, Scott. Hey, thanks for being a great evangelist. We need more like you.
Well, thank you so much. Our guest today, Rich Stearns, he is the author of the new book, Lead Like It Matters to God. You can get it wherever good books are sold. You can get it on Amazon. I'm sure just Google it, Lead Like It Matters to God. Get it, read it. I'm sure you'll be glad you have. We'll be right back.